Well, namaskar, and thank you very much for joining us here on the special program on India's G20 presidency, where we're going to give you a daily update on events taking place in India. Our correspondent Ajay Mishra has been covering the finance track meeting that concluded in Bengaluru today. So he sent us also an exclusive interview with the government's chief economic advisor, which will be the main item in this program. But as always, let's begin with the headlines first. The Chief Economic Advisor V. Anantha Nageswaran tells DD India that it is difficult to predict if there will be a global recession, but India will remain the fastest growing economy in the G20. The ILO lauds India's policy of rural employment and food security, and DBT ILO says many developing countries may adopt a similar strategy to tide over the current economic situation. The Framework Working Group successfully concludes its first meeting in Bengaluru. They discuss global inflation, a rise in interest rates, food and energy crisis, the FWG. It hopes to reach a consensus on some pressing global issues. The next meeting will be in Mahabalipuram in March of 2023. So let's get straight into our big interview, our top interview. Speaking exclusively to DD India, the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Anantha Krishnan. I beg your pardon, Dr. Nageswaran. Will you please... Dr. Anantha Nageswaran has talked to my colleague Ajay Mishra on the global recession, but India will remain the fastest growing in the G20.
After a successful completion of finance track meeting of G20 in Bangalore, the Framework Working Group had just concluded its deliberations, and we have with us a very exclusive conversation with the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, who actually led the Indian side. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking to us. Just to understand the working of this group, can you give us a general sense what has transpired from this two-day deliberations that you led?
For the Indian presidency, what did we agree on as our goals or priorities for 2023 are three things. One is, in the last 2 years, there has been a lot of concerns about food shortages, and energy prices went up. Energy prices, not only they went up, but even availability became an issue. So food and energy security and the consequences they have for economic growth, and therefore what can we do to mitigate these risks and make sure that low income and developing countries do not suffer from food and energy shortages. That became an important goal. So wherever the G20 can contribute to helping low income countries to avoid this food and energy shortage is one priority. The second, which is slightly more medium to long term, is what are the macroeconomic consequences of climate change and energy transition? Because the world is very clear that majority of the countries will have to move towards net zero.
Sir, so the inflation has a direct bearing on the interest rate. We have seen that the ECB has raised this interest rate 50 basis points recently, and also there is a sense that some other central banks might do the same thing. So what was the sense of the House about the interest rate and how the capital is going to perform, finance flow is going to perform due to this very important factors?
Sure. I mean, basically the sense of the House, as they say, the G20 members who participated in the FWG said inflation fighting is a top priority, and the Federal Reserve representative mentioned that they are very focused on curbing inflation, and therefore next year cost of financing in developed countries, in the USA, in the Eurozone, will keep rising. Whether that leads to reduced financial flows into emerging markets is something that we cannot say it will only have a negative consequence, because when interest rates rise at some point in the developed world, economic growth prospects will go down, and therefore investors will be looking for opportunities elsewhere. So in that sense, maybe there will be a short-term period when financial flows will be affected as interest rates go up, but once the effect of the interest rate begins to bite in the developed economies, and as if they go into a recession, then capital will be looking for opportunities. So in that sense, it is not all gloom and doom for emerging economies and developing countries. Capital flow may happen in the second half of the next calendar year.
Sir, the first strategy or the first focus of the working group that you just said, there is a macroeconomic interventions on the side of interest rates and the inflation side. What was the general sense of the House when it comes to inflation, because the World Bank projections are saying that the food prices and fuel prices are not going to come down maybe by the next year or so, and we have the presidency just for a year. So what was the general sense about the inflation and possible solutions to it?
Sure, I think one good news is that in the short run prices have come down, and from the high levels we saw at the beginning of the year and also around the middle of the year. Energy price, food prices were all higher, and today prices of commodities have come down, and even oil price, in fact, as we speak, the price of Brent crude also has dropped below $80. So maybe in the short run, very short run, there is no major sense of urgency as it was 6 months ago. But the problem hasn't gone away. The problem will persist, because climate change will also make food production very highly volatile. Countries can suddenly, for example, in India, we had a big heat wave burst in March, and that had an impact on the wheat crop. And similarly, many countries may go through excess flooding, excess rainfall we saw in Pakistan, and also or too little rain. And therefore, food security will remain with us as an issue. What the members said was, I think one way is to make sure that food grains flow freely across nations. So trade should be kept open as far as possible. And we also need to understand the impact that oil prices and energy prices have on food production, because we saw this year countries will have to use fiscal policy to support the low income segments of the population, but do it in a manner it is targeted and it is temporary, so that we can use the fiscal resources where it is most needed, as India has done. The ILO representative spoke about the fact that India's rural employment guarantee program and the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana program and the food security, all these things he noted that have contributed to ensuring that India did not suffer from the food insecurity problem that was being discussed. So for example, he mentioned that there is much that other countries can pick up from India's experience. So these were all the 4 elements that were discussed as part of the food and energy security dimension of the global economy.
Sir, coming to the food and energy prices, again there is an interlinkage between the two because the gas supplies acts as an input to the fertilizer production, and it got hampered, and we have seen the cost of fertilizer going doubled in 5 years from 17 to 2022. Fertilizer is a major portion for Indian subsidy burden. So where do India stand as far as these kind of the effect of these kind of rise on Indian economy and the budget in general, sir?
Thankfully for India, in the current financial year 22-23, although the government fully absorbed the impact of the higher fertilizer price, the budget was not affected or will not be affected. Budget estimates for fiscal deficit will not be affected because revenue growth was equally strong, and the government also had done a very sensible job of prudently estimating its revenues when they presented the budget in February 2022. So overall, this year we could accommodate this higher expenditure. And also the good news for us is that, as I mentioned, the energy or price of crude oil has come down now, and so also natural gas prices, because so far at least the winter in Europe has been milder. Of course, last week has been a bit of snowfall in Europe, but by and large the high energy price that we saw in the months between April and July are no longer there. So next year the fertilizer price may be lower, and we may not have to provide for the same amount of subsidy that we have provided.
Great, sir. So sir, coming on to again your framework working group, this was the first framework working group meeting. Are there such meeting lined up in the future, and what are you going to pick up as an agenda point in the subsequent meetings?
So this is the first framework working group meeting under the Indian presidency of the G20. The next one is in March near Chennai in Mahabalipuram. So the agenda is what I mentioned earlier, these 3 priorities. What will happen is, at every meeting, different dimensions of the same priorities will be discussed, And towards the end of the presidency, this working group will conclude its work plan and submit reports to the finance ministers or central bank governors, who will then incorporate the important conclusions and recommendations made by this working group in their communique, which will be released at the end of towards the end of the Indian presidency. And as you know, G20 is a consensus based group. The recommendations and the proposals coming from them are non-binding. So whatever comes up in the course of this meeting and the next 3 meetings will be in the nature of proposals, suggestions and non-binding recommendations, information sharing, or some more directions to international organizations to continue the work, etc. So this is a way in which this working group will feed into the finance ministers or central bank governors declaration towards the end of the presidency.
I was speaking to some of the delegations off record, though they didn't speak anything on camera, but they were very happy with the softer side of the whole negotiation process, and you also led them to showcase the startup ecosystem here in IIC Bangalore. Some of them visited Nandi Hills, and there was a coffee diplomacy on the side of the whole meetings, where they were just brewing it, the Indian coffee. It's getting the good brand. So can please share your experience about the softer side of this deliberations?
No, absolutely. I think it is. I'm not very surprised that they were all floored by our hospitality and what India has to offer, because we have plenty to offer. And of course the city of Bangalore is an extremely dynamic city, because the entire technology boom of India, the fountainhead is Bangalore. And when you visit institution of eminence like the IISc, Indian Institute of Science, and see some of these young entrepreneurs, their energy is infectious. Their enthusiasm is infectious, and that is what many of the delegates felt. They were quite impressed.
In the Indonesian presidency, the whole presidency was dominated by the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and there were not many members actually present and airing their views. Did everyone turn up during the India presidency? China, Russia, and European Union.
Right. Russia was there, European Union was there, and China did not come physically. They were participating through a web link. In general, I think most people are happy to come, but they all have their own human resource, budget constraints, and general timing constraints, because there are lots of meetings to attend, etc. So, but by and large, members are keen to come in person, because people have in general not been traveling much in the last 2 to 3 years because of the pandemic. So they are keen to come, and nothing like face-to-face meetings to be able to break ice and to move the agenda forward, because in many of these kind of gatherings, sometimes what happens outside the conference hall becomes more important than what happens inside, because the kind of relationships and freewheeling conversations that people have, I think they advance global relationships and also the global economic collective prosperity and shared goals. In fact, sometimes it is very good that we are talking, and the very fact that we are talking becomes more important than what we talk about. So in that sense, many members will show up in person. Some members, due to circumstances, may opt for virtual participation. That's understandable.
And sir, looking at the reports of recession from so many parts of the world, what was the general sense that about the recessionary pressure on the globe? What is the actual assumption of the G20 group? As a president, what do you feel where the economy, the world economy is heading, and India and emerging economies in particular?
No, timing of the recession is very challenging, because the lag between higher interest rates and their effect on economic growth is quite variable. It is difficult to say whether the global economy will indeed have a recession or not in 2023. All that we know is international organizations like World Bank, IMF and OECD have reduced their forecast for global growth, and that is understandable. But to predict a recession is very, very difficult. Of course, many members said, many international organizations that spoke clearly pointed out that India would remain an exception. Even if the rest of the global economy slows down considerably, Indian growth will be the highest in terms of G20 countries in 2023 and possibly in 2024 as well.
What are the members saying about the technicalities that you mentioned about that you will take technical inputs from WTO, from FAO to actually solve the food and energy crisis? So what was deliberated on the technical sides?
No, I think the idea is that the modeling work that is done by FAO on food and energy security and also production and demand, and also there was a presentation by the Network for Greening the Financial System, NGFS, on their modeling work of how transition climate and energy transition would play out. So members felt that it will be good to understand the models, and more importantly it will be good to understand how the models work with respect to each country, etc. And also they were very clear that whatever prescriptions and recommendations that come out of these exercises have to be tailor-made for country specific circumstances.
UK was the co-chair, sir. What was the role of the UK in co-chairing this whole?
No, normally for every working group, the co-chairs are the ones who translate the presidency's priorities into what is called a work plan. And it is the work plan that becomes the base document for the working group to work towards. So the work plan is aimed at translating the priorities of the presidency into actual output, something tangible output, and leads to either a report or some kind of a resolution paragraph, etc., or some recommendation to the international organizations, etc. So in that sense, the co-chairs play a very, very important role in concluding the work plan and in steering the work of the working group in the rest of the presidency year towards the deliverables. And this is jointly agreed upon between the presidency and the co-chairs. In the case of the framework working group, India happens to be both the presidency and one of the co-chairs, and the other one is UK, with whom we have an excellent working relationship.
Final question, sir. As a head of the framework working group, do you see that India reaching to a consensus of some of the pressing issues, macroeconomic issues, when we reach the final declaration level?
We are not the head of the framework working group. We are one of the two co-chairs, and as I said, this framework working group does not really have a conclusion per se, because it is an ongoing exercise, because this group started in as a group that will do a macroeconomic risk assessment back in 2008 or 9. So in that sense, its work is mostly of an ongoing nature, but what it contributes is to help different countries and also other groupings in the world and also international organizations, plus some of the advanced country members, understand the dimensions of the problems faced by developing countries, and also what are the priorities and the rationale of developed countries, which developing countries can understand better. So it is not as if these priorities will conclude and then there will be a completely new set of priorities when Brazil takes over. It won't be the case. It is an ongoing exercise.
Dr. Nageswaran, thank you very much for your time, precious time, and in speaking to us. So we can say that we are actually moving ahead in the right direction, that we have actually set the agenda under the Sherpa track, and everybody expecting that there would be some great consensus on some of the pressing issues when we really go for the final declaration in September 2023. Thanks for the introduction. That's all in this special conversation. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.
An important interview there with V. Anantha Nageswaran, the Chief Economic Advisor. Now moving on then to the framework working group meeting, which finally concluded. It's concluded successfully, their deliberations in Bengaluru. And what happened? This group, what did they do? They discussed several macroeconomic inputs needed to address some of the key issues, policy inputs needed to address some of the global challenges of rising food and energy prices. Ajay Mishra continues to report.
The Framework Working Group under G20 Finance Track discussed food and energy price challenges and its impact on the global economy in general and on the low-income countries in particular. The World Bank made a presentation on global commodity and energy prices. The report says that after surging by an expected 60% in 2022, energy prices are projected to decline 11% in 2023 and a further 12% next year in 2024. However, prices will remain more than 50% above their 5-year average through 2024. Persistently high energy prices will continue to have inflationary impact, particularly on transport and electricity costs. Inflationary pressures will be further exacerbated in countries with sizable currency depreciation against the US dollar. Brent crude oil prices are forecast to average at $92 per barrel in 2023, down from a projected $100 per barrel in 2022, before easing to $80 per barrel in 2024. A sharper than expected slowdown in global growth and continued COVID restrictions in China are the key downside risks to oil consumption. Experts are of the view that innovations coming out of India might be useful in solving the global challenges. Speaking exclusively with DD India, the regional economic advisor for Asian Development Bank referred to the recent study on innovation where Bengaluru emerged as the top destination.
Innovation that firms are carrying out, these are innovations that are catering to certain market demands. And we know that a lot of the challenges we are facing these days, there is a demand for this outside in whether it's in domestically, externally. So for example, take this issue of energy efficiency and new sources of energy. There is a vibrant market now globally, and firms will respond.
The working group also discussed food production value chain, efficiency of distribution network and innovative irrigation method to ease global food and energy prices. Rising labor costs due to COVID-induced lockdown also found space during the deliberations.
Big responsibilities, bigger ambitions. The big focus of the India G20 presidency is to accelerate new ideas and find new solutions to the global challenges. The 8 working groups under the finance track creates the backbone to solve the problems of Sherpa track. The framework working group has completed its deliberations successfully here in Bangalore and is expected to submit its report as soon as possible to the finance track deputies. With camera person Kuldeep Sharma, Ajay Mishra, DD India, Bangalore.
And the spiritual guru Jaggi Vasudev spoke to us about the deeper meaning associated with the theme One Earth, One Family, One Future.
G20 presidency could not have come at a better time for India than now, which is the Amrit Mahotsav or Amrit Kal for us, or 75 years of India's independence. It's very significant that India has taken the presidency of G20 nations for the coming year, the 23rd year of 21st century. In many ways, when the world is at crossroads, just after pandemic, major conflicts going on in the world, possibilities of nuclear conflagration being discussed in the world, this is the best time for India to take the presidency of G20 nations.
The G20 Finance Track meeting had its fair share of showcasing India's soft power. Now, there was a parallel coffee diplomacy brewing beyond the boardroom meetings of the G20, and a lot can happen over a cup of coffee. Remember, Ajay Mishra puts it into context.
Coffee is a very important and integral part of Karnataka's agrarian economy, and it is one of the core focus at G20 Finance Track Summit. We'll show you some, glimpses of the coffee promotion here. We have with us Dr. Ramya, who is from Indian Coffee Board. Ma'am, the connect with the G20 and few numbers just to share with our viewers.
We are here for promoting the coffees of India in the G20 meetings. So we have our six of our private partners as well, and this is our coffee board's place. We have got 13 regional coffees in India, out of which 6 of it is from Karnataka. 70% of the Indian coffee is grown in Karnataka only. So Karnataka is a major coffee producer, both Arabica and also Robusta. So we have some of the specialty coffees here. So this is the Mysore Nuggets Extra Bold, which are specialty coffee in India, and then Monsoon Malabar Arabica and Robusta Coffee Royal. We have also geographical indication tagged coffees. The major coffee, that is Chikmagalur coffee, which is a very unique coffee, and also the Baba Budangiri coffee, Baba Budangiri Arabica coffee. The coffee origin in India is also GI registered, and we also have Coorg Arabica coffee, which is also a GI registered coffee. And coming about the Monsoon Malabar, that is also a GI tagged coffee, Monsoon Malabar Arabica and Robusta.
Now we'll go to the the private partners, so which are a very important part of the whole process, and we'll try and understand how it is actually come, the whole process of growing and to the final product?
I really enjoy Indian coffee. I didn't know there were so many variety of coffee beans in India actually. This was a remarkable experience. Thank you for bringing us.
I can tell this much. Each time there's a break in the meeting, she brought me here to taste the coffee.
I'm always here.
I didn't know about coffee culture in India, and it's very impressive. Like, more people should know about it, I think.
First, let me welcome you for your hospitality and for your great coffee. I really much enjoyed it. Hopefully, I can get it away to the Netherlands.
We have with us Manoj Tanani, who is such a cultivator. Thanks very much, sir. Can you please share your experience and how has been, the G20 experience so far?
Sure. Hi, as you said, we basically are farmers here. Our company is established in Karnataka at Sakleshpur. So we are called the Harley Estates. We are there since 150 years, available here in Karnataka, where from here we sell all over India as well as to the entire world, from US to Australia. So basically we cultivate pure Arabica coffees and Robusta coffees. So after cultivation process we do that starting from picking till the cups. So from here we take on and we move and sell it to the various brands and the companies all across the world. Currently the 5th generation coffee planters are there in a company, taken over by the women's leaders from our own management. So they're doing a wonderful job growing coffees and spreading the love of coffees to the world. G20 experience has been wonderful, has been amazing for us. It's been total, the delegates coming and tasting our Indian coffees, loving our Indian coffees, and definitely telling us that they would spread the world of the Indian beautiful coffees across to their countries.
Thank you very much. So it's clear that the brand Indian coffee is getting a prominent voice here at G20, and actually the delegation is also liking it very much. With the camera person Kuldeep Sharma, Ajay Mishra, DD India, Bangalore.
Makes me feel like having a cup of coffee. Well, that's it on this half an hour show. That's all we could pack together for you. Do stay tuned to DD India as we get you a day-to-day update on the programs related to India's G20 presidency. Thanks for spending your evening with us. Have a cup of coffee. Namaskar.